My name is Emma. I am 27 years old, and after many years of hard work, sleepless nights, endless edits and projects on which my career depended, I have finally received the recognition I have been seeking for so long. A promotion, a new title, and with it a significantly higher salary, which finally allows me to afford what I dreamed of since university. The first days after the news of the promotion passed in euphoria. My colleagues congratulated me, my superiors nodded approvingly, and I still did not fully believe in the reality of what was happening. But when the first waves of excitement subsided and my head became quieter, I realized that this was the moment when I could fulfill one of my long-held dreams. I'll buy myself a car. And not just any one. I wanted something special, elegant, powerful, emphasizing my status, but at the same time convenient and smooth to manage. I spent weeks flipping through car dealership websites, studying technical specifications, comparing models, counting, calculating, and going into complex financial calculations to make sure that I could afford not only the down payment, but also the subsequent maintenance. I read reviews, watched video reviews, imagined exactly how this car would look in my garage, in the parking lot in front of the office, on the road leading out of town. And so, last Thursday, after gathering my thoughts, I finally crossed the threshold of the Mercedes dealership. My heart started beating faster as I walked inside. The showcase glass reflected the perfectly polished bodies. The cars were parked in rows. Each one was the perfection of engineering. Each one was a dream. I nervously squeezed the strap of my bag, feeling a little insecure, but then the salesman came up to me, a tall, middle-aged man with a friendly smile. His name was Mike, and he turned out to be surprisingly polite, without a hint of the condescending attitude that women sometimes face in car dealerships. He didn't try to explain the obvious things to me, didn't ask if I wanted something simpler, didn't suggest paying attention to more feminine models. On the contrary, he listened attentively, asked a couple of clarifying questions and offered several options that perfectly fit my needs. But the moment I got behind the wheel of one of them for the first time, I realized, this is it. The perfect leather upholstery of the seats, the perfectly assembled panel, smooth running, easy operation, and most importantly, the quiet, almost purring rumble of the engine, inspiring confidence and a sense of complete power over the road. 2 hours later, I was holding the keys to my dream car in my hands, still hardly believing that this was happening to me. The first few days were pure delight. Every time I approached the parking lot, I couldn't help but smile, proudly looking at the graceful lines of the body, feeling joy that I could afford it, that every penny invested in this car was deserved for many years of work. My colleagues were impressed, some sincerely congratulated me, others envied me in silence, and I enjoyed every moment behind the wheel. And then Saturday came, the day of the family dinner at my parents' house. And when I drove up to a familiar house, I didn't even suspect that this particular evening would spoil my mood. As soon as I parked at the driveway, the door of the house opened, and my younger sister Sarah appeared on the porch, a 20-year-old student, energetic, sometimes obnoxious, but, despite everything, beloved. She froze in place when she saw the car, her eyes widened, and then, literally forgetting everything, she rushed to the car, running around it in circles and, it seems, ready to burst into tears with delight. "Oh, my God, Emma! Is this yours?" Her voice was trembling with emotion. "It's just unbelievable. You have to let me try it, you just have to." I grinned as I closed the door and enjoyed her reaction, but before I could respond, my parents came out of the house. Mom stopped on the porch, clutching a folded towel to her chest. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. Dad, on the other hand, frowned, as he always did before his endless instructions about the proper allocation of funds. "Is this a new car?" Mom asked, holding back either delight or alarm in her voice. "Yes," I answered shortly, anticipating what was about to begin. "Emma," her father's voice sounded stern. "It must have cost a fortune. Are you sure you had to spend that much money?" I took a deep breath, trying not to roll my eyes, and nodded, smiling. The smell of dinner filled the house, and the table was already set. But Sarah couldn't calm down, repeating the same thing over and over, glancing out the window where my Mercedes was parked. "Emma, you just have to let me drive, at least for a minute. Can you imagine how jealous my friends are?" "No, Sarah," I shook my head, trying not to fall for her puppy dog look. "The car is brand new, and I still feel uncomfortable when someone else gets behind the wheel." "Oh, come on," she squealed, her lips immediately pouted, and resentment could be heard in her voice. "I'm a good driver." "This is out of the question," I said firmly, picking up a fork. "Mom, Dad, tell her she's selfish." She turned to her parents with feigned desperation, hoping for support. "Emma," my father began, shaking his head, "your sister just wants to go for a little ride. Would it kill you if you shared?" I looked up, feeling a wave of irritation rise. "This is my car, and I decide who is driving." Sarah's face instantly turned red, and then green with anger. She abruptly pushed back her chair, so that it slid back with a bang, and, snorting loudly, ran out of the room, stomping up the stairs. A moment later, her bedroom door slammed. "I can't believe how selfish you are," Mom said, shaking her head in disappointment. "We raised you better." I silently looked at the plate, which I had barely touched, and suddenly realized that my appetite was gone. Pursing my lips, I pushed back my chair, grabbed my keys and, without saying another word, headed for the door. No one tried to stop me. When I was driving home that night, the empty streets reflected the glare of rare streetlights in the windshield. The monotonous rhythm of the rain, which suddenly began to fall, was accompanied by the quiet rumble of the engine, but my thoughts were far from the surrounding reality. Memories came flooding back, rising from the bottom of my memory with painful clarity, and the familiar feeling of dull pain in my chest returned, the same one I felt countless times while raising my younger sister, who always seemed to get privileges, and I only had the duty to be older, more responsible, more mature. My entire childhood and youth were spent under this burden, and now, after so many years, nothing has changed. I turned out to be bad again, simply because I did not give Sarah exactly what she wanted at that moment. Sarah has always been a favorite of her parents, their little princess, who was not denied anything. If she liked a toy, they bought it before she even had time to really point her finger at the desired thing. If she was moody or crying, the whole house would immediately go into crisis mode, where the main task was to calm her down at all costs, and I stayed away because all I had to do was be reasonable, mature, and compliant. "You're older, Emma," Mom would say when I was outraged. "Be an example to your sister," her father echoed her. Memory helpfully pulled out one of the most memorable memories when I stopped at a red light. I was 16 at the time, and I faced humiliating embarrassment every time I took my old, battered phone, which used to belong to my dad, out of my pocket. It was secondhand, with a cracked screen and a dying battery that lasted only a couple of hours, but I had to put up with it because phones are expensive, as my mother used to say. Meanwhile, Sarah, who was only 9 at the time, proudly showed off her brand new iPhone at school because all her friends had already won the same ones from their parents. I remember that dinner when I first dared to raise this issue. We were sitting at the table, and I gathered all my resolve and said, "Mom, Dad, my phone is almost not working anymore. Should I buy a new one too?" Mom exchanged a glance with Dad before responding with her usual condescension. "Emma, phones are expensive. If you really want a new one, maybe you should consider a job. You're old enough now." So, the following week, I got a job at a local grocery store, clearing shelves after school and punching items at the checkout. The manager, Mrs. Thompson, took pity on me and gave me as many working hours as the laws allowed, and I still remember the bitterness mixed with pride when, 3 months later, I was finally able to buy myself a normal phone. Meanwhile, Sarah got her second new one of the year. The first one somehow, mysteriously, disappeared during a pool party, and her parents immediately bought her a replacement. The truth was, I never had a choice but to be independent. Every time I needed something, the answer remained the same: figure it out for yourself. Whereas Sarah is used to getting everything easily and effortlessly. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, carefully steering the Mercedes into its place, and couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of the situation. I'm 27, and I can finally afford good things, but my family still thinks I'm selfish if I'm in no hurry to share them with Sarah. 2 weeks have passed since that ill-fated dinner, and no one has bothered me all this time. My parents didn't call or complain, and Sarah just seemed to have forgotten about me, and that was more than fine with me. But one Saturday afternoon, when I was sitting comfortably on the couch sorting through my work mail, the doorbell rang. I was surprised, but when I opened it, I found Sarah on the threshold, beaming with a wide smile, which immediately alerted me. She was bouncing up and down on her toes, her eyes twinkling mischievously, and she was holding a phone in her hands. "Hi, little sister," she chirped, looking into my eyes with feigned joy. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I crossed my arms over my chest, waiting for her to continue, because I knew that Sarah never just walked in. "Could I take some pictures with your car?" "What is it?" she asked almost pleadingly, pouting. "Just for Instagram." "You are welcome." I sighed, knowing that if I refused, would be made out to be a villain again, and shaking my head, I reached for the keys. "Okay. But only photos." It was naive to think that everything would be limited to a couple of pictures. As soon as we went down to the parking lot, Sarah instantly turned a small photo shoot into a full-scale production. She changed poses, jumped up, sat on the hood, pretended to open the door and get behind the wheel, then said that the natural shots were not coming out as well as she expected, and started over. I stood nearby, leaning against the car next to me and crossing my arms over my chest, watching this performance, but after 10 minutes my patience was gone. "Sarah, I think you've already taken enough pictures," I said, nodding toward her phone, which was flashing countless shots from different angles. "Just a couple more," she waved off, putting her foot inside the car. "No," my voice sounded tougher than I had planned. She flinched, but immediately straightened up, pouting. "Well, Emma, why are you like this? Just getting in the car is nothing to worry about." I exhaled, trying to contain my irritation. "Sarah, this is my car. If I don't want anyone to sit in it, that's my right." "God, what's wrong with you?" she blurted out, glaring at me. "I just wanted normal pictures." She abruptly turned around and walked away, throwing over her shoulder. "Yes, you sit with your damn car, greedy." I stayed where I was, watching her figure disappear around the corner, and feeling the familiar tiredness weigh heavily on my shoulders. Nothing has changed. I'll always be bad in her eyes, just because I don't play by her rules. Sarah made me take pictures of her with the car from so many angles that it seemed like I spent an eternity in the parking lot, watching her take one pose after another, leaning against the door, flirtatiously tilting her head, sitting on the hood, which almost gave me a heart attack, because I imagined the way her jeans rivets scratched the perfectly smooth surface, and then, satisfied with her performance, she took the driver's seat without the slightest hesitation, keeping her hands on the steering wheel as if it were really her car. Finally, after what seemed like several hours, she declared that she had enough material, and quickly said goodbye, staring at her phone screen, probably posting photos online even before she left the car. I shook my head, still not believing that I had allowed her to stage this circus, but I decided not to think about it anymore. However, in the evening, lying on the couch, I couldn't stand it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened her Instagram. Of course, there were already a whole series of professional-looking pictures: Sarah with my Mercedes, Sarah driving, Sarah with a thoughtful expression on her face, as if she had just made a serious purchase. The comments section was overflowing. "Oh my God, girl, is this yours? When are you taking me for a ride in this beauty? Since when do you have a Mercedes?" And, of course, Sarah's answers were deliberately vague. All in good time. Good he comes to those who are waiting, you will see soon. I rolled my eyes and closed the app. Classic. Sarah was trying to make her friends think she had something that wasn't there. It looked childish, but in the end it was harmless. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. It's been a week, and I've been busy preparing for an important business trip to Arizona. We were planning a major presentation for a client, on which a significant part of the company's future work depended, and I was flying away with my assistant Tom. I called my mom to let her know that I would be away for a few days, an old habit that I had never been able to get rid of, despite all the past conflicts. The first 2 days of the trip went smoothly, the presentation was successful, the client was satisfied, and that evening, when I returned to the hotel, feeling pleasantly tired from the work I had done, my phone rang. I didn't even look at the screen before answering. I knew it was my mom, probably just calling to check on me. Emma. Her voice was strained. There was an accident. My heart skipped a beat. What happened? Everything is fine. Sarah. Mom hesitated. Sarah's fine, but your car, she sighed. She couldn't stand the accident. It took me a few seconds to make sense of her words. My car? What do you mean? How could Sarah? I stopped abruptly, because the answer had become obvious on its own. There was a long pause on the line. Emma, it doesn't matter right now. It's important that Sarah needs your help. They're arresting her for drunk driving, and, apparently, she resisted arrest. I closed my eyes, feeling my breathing falter, and a dull, furious wave rise in my chest. It was like some kind of twisted nightmare. She stole my car, got drunk, crashed it, and then made a scene with the police. Emma, Mom's voice became softer, pleading. Don't be dramatic. She needs you to come home and help her deal with this. She's scared. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold them. The messages started pouring in one after another. Mom, Dad, even some distant relatives whom I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly felt the need to tell me that Sarah needed help, that this wasn't the end of the world, that I should just come back and sort everything out. But I couldn't even look at those messages. I knew that if I answered anyone now, if I entered into this conversation, would say things that could no longer be taken back. I took a few deep breaths, forcing myself to calm down before I dialed Tom's number. Are you busy? I asked as soon as he picked up the phone. No, I'm just sorting through the presentation materials. Something happened? I briefly outlined the essence of what was happening, trying my best to keep my voice from shaking, so that it would not betray the rage that was boiling inside. Tom, I need to get home right away. I'll leave the rest to you. Can you handle it? Of course, don't worry, I'll do everything. He didn't even hesitate. I clutched the phone in my hand, feeling the first wave of anger begin to give way to heavy, icy disappointment. All this time I thought that Sarah was just childish, that her irresponsibility was limited to cheap tricks for the sake of attention, but now it became clear to me that she never saw the boundaries, never understood the consequences, because she always knew that in the end someone else would sort everything out for her. I pressed the button to call a taxi and headed out of the hotel, knowing that this conversation with my family would be the hardest in my entire life. Then came an even more difficult call, to my boss, Richard. I took a deep breath, trying to speak calmly, but everything inside me tightened with tension as I briefly outlined the essence of the problem: carjacking, accident, arrest. It's a family emergency, I finished, clutching the phone in my hands. To my relief, Richard was understanding. This is serious, he said, without asking any questions. Tom can handle it, he's more than capable of seeing it through. Book the next flight home and keep me posted. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, quickly opened the airline's app and booked a ticket for the next flight. 3 hours later, I was already sitting on the plane, staring out the window, but instead of seeing the night city below me, I replayed the worst scenarios over and over in my head. How badly is my car wrecked? What exactly happened that night? Why did Sarah drive drunk? At what point did she think it was a good idea? The flight lasted only a few hours, but it seemed to me that it dragged on endlessly. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on a single thought for more than a few seconds, because each one led to even more rage and frustration. When I finally got to my city and got out of the airport, all I wanted to do was drive home, take a hot shower, and at least stay in silence for a few minutes to figure out what to do next. But the universe had other plans. As soon as I opened the door of my apartment, the pungent smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit me in the nose. I froze on the threshold, my stomach clenched uncomfortably, my fingers tightened on the handle of the bag. An uneasy premonition flashed through my head, and even though part of me already knew what I was about to see, I nevertheless stepped inside and turned on the light. A battlefield opened up in front of me. Empty bottles were scattered everywhere, on the table, on the windowsill, even on the floor. Some of them toppled over, and sticky dark spots spread over my cream carpet, hopelessly spoiling it. Cigarette butts were scattered on the coffee table, and ugly burn marks were now visible on its surface. Half-eaten slices of pizza and empty cardboard boxes littered the couch and chairs, as if someone hadn't even bothered to throw out the trash after the party. I took a few cautious steps forward, looking around in mute shock, and then it dawned on me. Mom always insisted that she have a spare key to my apartment, in case of unforeseen circumstances, she said when I first moved in. Sarah, of course, knew about it. She undoubtedly took it while I was away, threw a party, and then, after drinking a lot, decided to take my car and drive around the city. I clenched my jaw, feeling a new wave of anger wash over me. It was at that moment that my phone vibrated. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. A message from Mom: "We know you're back. Come home." Rage dragged me through a 15-minute drive to my parents' house. I didn't even notice the road, I was so overcome with emotions. As soon as I arrived, I saw that they were waiting for me on the porch. Both looked tired, as if they had aged several years in the last 24 hours. But any sympathy I might have felt for them evaporated as soon as I got out of the car, and Mom attacked me. "How dare you hang up on me?" "Stop it," she screamed, clenching her hands into fists. "We've been trying to reach you for hours." I cut her off in the middle of her tirade. "Where is she?" The parents exchanged glances. Mom sighed, her voice dropping noticeably. "She's at the police station. She's being held until someone posts bail." I turned around and, taking out my phone, said coldly, "I'm going there." "We'll go with you," my father said firmly, stepping forward. I rolled my eyes, but I didn't argue. The trip to the police station was stressful. I was sitting in the front seat next to the driver, while my parents were whispering softly but furiously in the back seat. I tried not to listen, but fragments of their conversation reached me anyway. "We need to talk to the dean. If we explain that it was a mistake, perhaps the scholarship will remain. She can't have it in her business." They were already making plans to get Sarah out of this mess, how to protect her from the consequences, how to convince everyone that this was just a stupid mistake. As always, Sarah messes up, and everyone else has to fix it. When we got inside, the fluorescent lights made the police station even more gloomy, and the air was heavy and stagnant. The officer silently led us to the detention cells, and there, behind the metal bars, sat Sarah, still in her shiny short dress she had worn to the party. Her hair was disheveled, and black mascara was running down her cheeks. As soon as she saw me, her eyes flashed, and she clutched the bars, her voice echoing down the hallway. "Emma, finally." She yanked at the bars as if she could pull them out. "It's all your fault. You and your stupid car got me into this mess. Get me out of here right now." I froze, stunned by her audacity. She didn't even realize what she had done. She didn't even consider herself guilty. In her eyes, the problem wasn't that she stole my car, got drunk, crashed into something, and got into a fight with the cops. No, the problem for her was that I didn't drop everything and come to her rescue right away. I looked at her, and everything inside me froze. Some things never change. A policeman approached us, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark circles under his eyes and an expression of fatigue, as if he had seen such scenes too many times before. Parents begging to save their child, a broken young girl who has not yet realized what she has done, and a third party, usually an older brother or sister, who is trying to resolve the situation. The plaque on his chest read, "Officer Martinez." He glanced briefly at me, then at his parents, then opened his notebook and spoke in a flat, almost automatic voice. "You must be Emma Thompson." "The real Emma," he muttered to himself, but I heard and immediately tensed. "What do you mean, the real Emma?" I asked, although an unpleasant feeling was already rising inside, making my skin crawl. Officer Martinez sighed and flipped through a few pages of his notebook. "Last night, at about 2 o'clock, we received several calls from alarmed residents of the area that a Mercedes was speeding along Palmer Street, weaving along the road, creating emergency situations. When our patrol officers arrived at the scene, they found that the car had crashed into a telephone pole. Your sister and 3 of her friends were inside, all clearly intoxicated." He paused, turned the page, and continued. "According to witnesses, they weren't just driving, they were racing through a residential area. The music was blaring at full volume. They were leaning out of windows, shouting something to passers-by. When our officers tried to detain them, your sister stated that she was Emma Thompson and that this was her car. And then, when she was asked to leave, she began to resist arrest and became aggressive." I turned abruptly to Sarah, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Why did you tell them that you were me?" She rolled her eyes and shrugged her shoulders, as if I was asking something insignificant, as if it wasn't about a crime, but about who was the last person to finish the milk. "Well, it's your car," she snorted. "You should have handled it." I felt anger rising inside me, not hot, destructive, but icy, burning through. "Deal with it?" I started, but Mom interrupted me, covering my hand with her own. Her voice was soft, but there were already familiar notes of manipulation in it. "Emma, dear, this is not the time for a showdown. It's important to get Sarah out of here. We need you to pay the deposit for her." I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Officer Martinez cleared his throat and continued as if this part of the conversation was something he was used to. "Besides drunk driving and resisting arrest, there are several other problems. Firstly, damage to municipal property. The pole that your car crashed into belongs to the city, and its repair will cost several $1,000s. Secondly, one of the passengers, Miss Kathy Anderson, was seriously injured. She has a broken collarbone and a concussion. Her parents have already filed a lawsuit for personal injury. They won't sue if we get this sorted out quickly," Mom added with a note of alarm in her voice, now looking only at me. "Emma, you have to pay for her medical expenses. We can't let this go to trial." The officer nodded grimly. "Yes, Miss Thompson, the Andersons are extremely upset. I understand them, their daughter suffered, and they want justice. If there is no peaceful settlement, the matter may go further." I looked at him, then at my mother, who nervously clasped her fingers together, at my father, whose face was frozen in his usual stern mask, and at Sarah, who was now quietly sniffing behind bars, pretending to be remorseful. "So, how much is the total?" I asked, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Mom started counting off her fingers quickly. $5,000 for the bail, several thousand for damage to municipal property, Katie's medical bills, and, of course, we need a good lawyer. She looked at me expectantly, as if this conversation was already over, as if my answer was obvious, because of course I would cry. And at that moment, something inside me finally broke. No. My voice sounded flat, cold, even calm. There was a deafening silence. Sarah looked at me as if I had suddenly spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean, no? Mom asked, and her voice began to rise, turning into the same piercing tone that had made me retreat all my life. I won't pay anything. Mom froze, then shook her head as if she couldn't believe her ears. Emma, you can't just leave your sister here. I crossed my arms over my chest. I can. My father frowned. Do you really want Sarah to spend the night in a cell? I looked at him, at his cold, demanding eyes, at the lines around his lips that deepened every time he was displeased with me. Do you really want me to cover it up again? There was silence. Mom gasped, her eyes glittering with anger or tears. You don't understand what this means for her future. I laughed, a short, bitter laugh. Are you worried about Sarah's future? Have you ever been worried about mine? Mom opened her mouth, but I didn't wait for an answer. I turned around and walked to the exit, feeling a strange, unusual feeling rise in my chest, not anger, not relief, but something like the realization that finally, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. Sarah gripped the bars of the cell, her knuckles white with tension, desperation glittering in her eyes. But even now, even when she was here on her own stupidity, even when the consequences of her actions were obvious, she was not going to admit guilt. You can't leave me here. She screamed, looking at me with wide-open eyes full of indignation, as if what was happening was solely my fault, as if I, not she, had stolen a car, got drunk behind the wheel and crashed into a telephone pole. Dad stepped forward, and his face turned that dangerous shade of red that I remembered all too well from childhood. In those rare moments when he lost his temper, Mom always said it was because he was worried, but I knew it was his way of forcing everyone around him to obey, a reminder that his word was always the last. Emma, your sister needs your help. His voice sounded low, restrained, but anger was already building in it. It's not up for discussion. I straightened up, steadied my breathing, felt a firm, unyielding decision rise in my chest, and said, You're right. It's not up for discussion. Sarah sobbed convulsively, her lower lip trembled, but I no longer allowed myself to fall for her tricks. I was not going to believe in these fake tears that she had been honing for years. She stole my car, I said evenly, enunciating every word. She broke into my apartment, took the keys without permission, got drunk, got behind the wheel, crashed the car, put her friend's life in danger, and then, to top it all off, told the police my name, hoping that I would figure it out for her. Sarah jerked up, her face purple with anger. But it was your car. Stop it, she screamed, her voice breaking. You are responsible. I whirled on her, gritting my teeth, trying to control my mounting rage. Responsible? I echoed. Let me tell you about responsibility, Sarah. She froze, but I didn't give her a chance to speak again. I am the registered owner of this car. The insurance is issued in my name, but guess what? I paused, watching her purse her lips. Your name is not on the insurance policy. Do you have any idea what that means? Mom tried to get in a word, but I spoke louder, preventing her from interrupting me. This means that the insurance company will not pay a cent for the damage. Not for the car. No way. Not for Katie's medical bills. And since you told the police my name, I might be in trouble with the law now. I inhaled sharply, trying to control the tremor in my voice, but rage was bubbling inside me. Emma, Dad said warningly, his voice low, almost threatening. You need to think about what's best for this family. I slowly turned to him and looked straight into his stern, frowning face. Oh, do you want me to think about family? I asked with icy calm. What did you think of me when you gave Sarah my spare key? When did I let her throw parties in my apartment? When did you always take her side, no matter what she did. I heard a sob, and when I turned around, I saw that Sarah was no longer just crying. She had burst into loud, heart-rending sobs, clasping her hands on the bars. Her shoulders were shaking, and her face was distorted with resentment and anger. "You're so mean," she screamed, sniffling. "You've always been jealous of me." I exhaled slowly, turned around, and met the gaze of Officer Martinez, who had been silently watching our family drama all this time with the expression of someone who had seen this too many times. "Officer," I said, and my voice sounded unexpectedly calm, even to myself. "I want to file a report on burglary and entry." Everyone in the room froze. "What?" Mom gasped. "Sarah stole my car," I said clearly, as if I were reading it point by point. "She illegally entered my apartment using a spare key. She took my car without permission. She stole my keys. You can't do this to me." Sarah screamed, going from sobbing to screaming. "Mom, Dad, don't let her do this." I saw Mom turn pale, her hands shaking, her lips twitching before she took a deep breath and screamed, "Emma, you're destroying the family." Dad, on the other hand, flushed with rage, his face contorted, his jaw clenched so that I heard gnashing of teeth. He took a step toward me, and I didn't even need to see his eyes to know what he was going to say. "You," he began, and his voice was full of that angry threat I remembered from childhood. "You ungrateful little thing." He made a sudden movement with his hand, and I instinctively recoiled, but I didn't have time. Officer Martinez was between us instantly, standing right in front of me and raising his hands, stopping Dad before he could do anything more. "Sir," his voice was hard, firm, full of warning. "I need you to step back and calm down, or you will join your youngest daughter in the cell." There was a heavy silence in the room. I saw 2 more policemen come out of the hallway, attracted by the noise, their hands already on their belts, ready for any eventuality. Dad was breathing heavily and noisily, his chest was heaving, his eyes were flashing, but he still retreated. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and turned back to Officer Martinez. "Officer," I said, and although my hand was shaking, my voice was steady, "I'm officially filing a theft report." He nodded and motioned for me to go into his office. I sat down across from him, and he handed me a form. Everything inside me was shaking, but I picked up a pen and started writing. Every detail. How Sarah got into my apartment with a spare key. How she stole my keys. How she got drunk and crashed my car. How she tried to blame everything on me by telling the police my name. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was really making a difference. When I finally left the police station, the night air seemed too thick, too heavy, as if the world outside had changed in the few hours I'd been inside. I looked around, automatically searching for the familiar outline of my parents' car, but the parking lot was empty. They're gone. Without even trying to talk to me again. Without even throwing the last reproaches at my back. Some kind of dull, dragging cold crept into my chest, and it took me a moment to recognize its nature. Was it relief that they left without trying to break me with another wave of pressure? Or, on the contrary, is it the empty, heavy bitterness of realizing that for them I am now not just a black sheep, but also a person who can be so easily left behind? I picked up my phone, opened the app, and called Uber. While waiting for the car, I looked back several times, expecting to see the headlights of my parents' car suddenly flash somewhere in the distance, or that when I arrived home, I would find them waiting for me at the door, ready for a new batch of reproaches and demands. But the street remained quiet. When I finally got to the apartment and inserted the key into the lock, something inside clenched uncomfortably. There was no sense of comfort or security here anymore. I knew that Sarah could come in here at any moment without my knowledge, without my permission, just because she had the key. The thought was unbearable. I took a deep breath, then, without hesitation, scrolled through my contacts and called my hostess, Angela. Emma? There was a hint of surprise in her voice. Is something wrong? Angela, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I have a serious situation. I heard my voice tremble slightly, but I pulled myself together. My spare key was stolen. My sister used it, threw a party in my apartment and, on top of that, stole my car. Can I change the locks? I'll pay for everything. Angela gasped, and her voice warmed with concern. Oh, dear, of course. I'll call Joe now. He's our permanent locksmith. He can be at your place in an hour. Thank you, I breathed, feeling the tension ease a little. True to her word, Angela organized everything quickly. 40 minutes later, Joe stood on the doorstep, a burly middle-aged man with a massive set of tools. He worked silently, methodically, and I watched as, with each turn of his tools, my anxiety receded like a receding tide. When he was done, he handed me the only copies of the new keys, and I held them in my palm as if I were holding not just metal, but a symbol of my peace of mind. But even that wasn't enough. I went down to the ground floor and went to the concierge desk. Marcus has always been friendly with me, and now his face darkened with concern when I explained the situation. I need to make sure that my parents and sister are not allowed to enter the building. Not under any circumstances. He frowned, but nodded. Copy that, Emma. I will add them to the list of unwanted visitors. Thank you, I said, feeling at least some support under my feet for the first time in the last 24 hours. But even after that, I hardly slept. I was startled by every sound outside the window, by every rustle in the hallway, by every random light glinting on the wall. And then, early in the morning, when I was already lying staring at the ceiling, the phone rang. I picked up the phone without even looking at the screen. Miss Thompson, said a professional but cold voice. I'm calling about the incident with your Mercedes. My stomach clenched. Yes, I said, gripping the phone tighter. According to the police report, the driver was drunk and not listed on your insurance policy. Is everything right? I closed my eyes. That's right, I replied. This is my sister. She stole my car. I filed charges. But the woman on the other end of the line didn't express the slightest sympathy. Due to the circumstances, drunk driving, passenger injury, damage to municipal property, I regret to inform you that we will not be able to cover any damage. I felt my heart beating louder. What? All expenses are borne by you. In addition, this incident will affect your insurance rating in the future. The ringing in the phone sounded like a punch in the face. I slowly sank onto the couch, staring blankly in front of me. Anger began to build up again, rising in a heavy, furious wave. Sarah didn't just destroy my car. She ruined my insurance rating, which meant that my future insurance rates would skyrocket if I managed to get coverage at all. She created a chain reaction of consequences that will haunt me for years. There may be legal problems because she used my personal data. And now Katie's parents can sue, thinking that I'm somehow responsible, just because the car is registered in my name. It all fell on me at once, crushing my chest with an icy weight. Sarah did it. But I had to pay. I knew I had to call Katie's parents. The Andersons had known me since high school. Katie and I went to dance lessons together. I even babysat her a few times while her parents were at work, and although we hadn't talked much in recent years, I knew they deserved to hear the truth from me directly. My hands were shaking as I dialed Mrs. Anderson's number, and as the phone rang briefly, possible conversation scenarios played out in my head. Would they condemn me, blame me for what had happened, demand an explanation, or, worse, money? She answered on the second ring, her voice strained, tired, like someone who had already spent too many hours in the hospital at her daughter's bedside. Mrs. Anderson, I need to tell you everything that happened, I said, trying to keep my voice level, but even I could hear the hidden tremor in it. I told them everything, How Sarah used the spare key and threw a party in my apartment. How she took my car without permission. How all of them, including Katie, were drinking. How Sarah got behind the wheel drunk and crashed into a telephone pole. And after all this she tried to shift responsibility to me by calling the police. My name. When I finished, there was a heavy silence on the phone, and then I heard Mr. Anderson sigh heavily somewhere in the background. They turned on the speakerphone. Emma, his voice was hard, but not angry, rather filled with disappointment and firm determination. We are not going to bring any lawsuits against you, but we will sue your sister. My heart thudded. Katie's medical bills are substantial, and her recovery will take months. Sarah has to answer for this. I closed my eyes, exhaling through clenched teeth. I understand, I whispered. 2 days later, I found out from my aunt that my parents had borrowed money from various family members to help Sarah out. And then I saw my mother's Facebook post. Sometimes in difficult times you see who shows their real colors. When your own sister refuses to help you in the most difficult hour, it breaks a mother's heart. Family should always come first. I felt rage rising in me. I couldn't let that happen. I wrote my own post. She told the whole truth, about the theft, about drunk driving, about identity fraud, about everything that happened, without softening or embellishing. But instead of support, I received a flood of messages from relatives accusing me of cruelty. How could you put family problems on public display? You abandoned your sister when she needed you. A family must stick together no matter what. And then first my parents and then Sarah started demanding that I help pay for the services of a lawyer. When I blocked their numbers, they switched to messaging apps. When I blocked them there, they started showing up at my apartment. Thank God for Marcus, my concierge, who refused them entry every time. But I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I found a new apartment on the other side of the city, in a secure building with good security. I didn't tell anyone the address, not even my aunt, who was the only relative who had any sympathy for me. At work, I talked to the head of the security service. I don't like asking this, I said, feeling awkward but knowing I had to do it. But my family members might try to show up here. They should not be allowed to enter, under any circumstances. Weeks have passed. According to family rumors, I found out that Sarah's parents borrowed even more money to pay for Sarah's legal fees. The trial with the Andersons went exactly as I expected. Sarah was ordered to pay significant damages for Katie's medical bills and emotional distress. And then I heard that Sarah had been expelled from college. Apparently, drunk driving and assaulting a police officer violated their student code of conduct. Who would have thought? My mother, of course, couldn't resist posting another dramatic message online. When envy and cruelty lead to your sister destroying your future, you realize that sometimes the worst traitors are those you called family. But I didn't respond. Let them think what they want. In the end, I lost the car of my dreams, the insurance company didn't pay a dime, and my rates at other companies were now sky high. I lost my family, but to be honest, did I ever have one? I lost the cozy apartment I had lived in for several years, and I had to start all over again in a new place. But now, as I sit here in my new apartment, enjoying the silence, the peace, the absence of endless calls, demands, accusations, when for the first time in many years there is no tension in the air and endless guilt in my chest, I understand. I've gained something much more. Freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from responsibility for other people's mistakes, from the constant expectation that I should be the one to fix everything. The freedom to be yourself.